On the Road with Kelli and Bob is brought to you by Mueller Metal Roofs and Buildings. Made in America, made to last. Coming up on this episode...
I'm really interested in history, and this is an important part of local history. And one of the few schools that's been restored.
Hi, we're Kelli
and Bob Phillips, and we're on the perpetual road trip of America's back roads,
where the journey is always the destination.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for this edition of On the Road with Kelli and Bob. I'm Bob Phillips.
And I'm Kelli Phillips. This next story fits into a category we call the way things were. Lots of folks are what we call eat up with history. And that often suits us just fine because looking back and comparing yesterday with today usually serves a purpose.
We are pretty far out in the Missouri countryside. Why is this building here?
It was a rural school that was opened in 1915 and it was operational until 1948 when the rural schools were consolidating and sending kids to town. So yeah, it served the community of New Bethel for, that span of time.
Karen Allmeter is in love with an old building in a rural setting in Missouri, and she should be. Karen and her husband and a few volunteers here and there have poured the last 14 years of their lives into this old two-room schoolhouse. They didn't want to see it rot into the ground or even torn down. After all, at one time, this little building was the center of this community.
And mostly as a school, but also as a church, and for this community, like by socials.
They did that a lot back then, right?
Yes.
Especially in the rural areas,
Yeah.
where it was kind of a community building,
It was, yeah. But it's significant, I think, because it's built of native stone. The local farmers hauled in truckloads of, or wagon loads, I should say, of rock. The property, the school and the property belonged to Floyd Crowdy, and he lived in that house right there. It was all part of the same property, 19 acres. And so they had the school built here. We formed a nonprofit group organization in 2011 and began the restoration process.
What was that like?
So it was arduous. It was not easy. Being an old building and neglected, most of the windows were in terrible condition. We had to replace about half of the windows. The roof was okay, thank goodness, but the whole building was covered with grapevines. We had to pull all that down.
How long had it been unused and just sitting here?
It wasn't exactly unused, it just wasn't maintained. The people that owned it for the longest period of time were the Snows who lived in the Crowdy house, and he just used it for a workshop.
These days, the kids around here go into the town of Anderson, about 3 miles away, over by the highway to public school. Karen, who spent most of her life as a teacher, says there is something to be said for going back to smaller school districts.
I think we've lost a lot by bringing all, like here we have one high school and kids come from, 6 different elementary schools to the high school. And it's huge. I even remember when I was in high school in Colorado, it just felt like a number. It was impersonal, there were so many kids. So I think there's something to be said for deconsolidating.
And maybe that's one reason Karen has spent so much time putting this old schoolhouse back together, bringing it back as close to the way it used to be as possible. Karen had a dream.
We have lived here since 1984, and we're just half a mile down that road. And I love the old school, and I had sort of a dream that we would see children in and out of the school, laughing, playing. So that was sort of my dream. And I'm really interested in history, and this is an important part of local history of Bethel County. One of the few, really, I think there's just one other school that's been restored, but it's not being used like ours is. So it's unique.
How long did it take, once you started to restore it, how long did it take you to get it?
It took us 10 years, from 2011 to 2021.
So this building turned 100 during that period?
Yes, it did. We had hopes of celebrating at the anniversary, which would have been, 2015, but there was no way. There was just way too much work to do. But it paid off in the end. It was a long, difficult process, but it paid off. It's a beautiful, beautiful landmark now.
Was it always known as New Bethel School when it was open as a school?
Yeah, this is the New Bethel community here.
And how many grades?
It was all the rural schools were grades 1 through 8, but the one-room schools, of course, had one teacher, all 8 grades. Two-room schools had 2 teachers, 2 classrooms, and the grades were split 1 through 4 and 5 through 8.
And then once they reached the 9th grade and wanted to go on, where would they go if they went to this little school?
They would have gone to Anderson.
Which is?
To the nearest town. It's just about 3 miles. But to start with, they had to provide their own transportation if they wanted to go to high school. There were no buses that ran, so they would wagon pool.
So a lot of times those kids would end up on the family farm and helping out.
Yeah, it wasn't unusual just to complete 8 grades.
Let's go inside.
Sure. This is the foyer to start with. This is the only electric light that we have in the school. We installed it because we found where there had been a light there, but otherwise there were no lights.
So one classroom over here to our left and another one over here to our right.
And this is, of course, there were coat racks here, so I built coat racks there. There were no desks in the school when we bought it, so I just acquired them one by one and refinished them, and so we've got about 19 now.
There were 2 rooms in the old schoolhouse at New Bethel, one for grades 1 through 4 and the other for grades 5 through 8. Karen and company have restored not just the building, but the classroom, all for the purpose of showing kids today what life was like for the kids who attended this school decades ago. It is an eye-opening experience.
Of the United States of America and to the republic.
They start the day with kids saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Historic School Day was just a couple weeks ago, and the kids spend an entire day here. And a school day was typically from 9 until 4. So to get the feel of walking to school, they walk from New Bethel Church to the school, which is a half mile. And we ring the school bell at 9 o'clock, and then we have them pump water for the day. And we have them bring in firewood, which is out back, for the stove. Of course, they have to keep feeding the stove through the day, but they like doing that.
You're giving them a real taste of what it would have been like.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It's kind of an immersion experience. Of course, that's just a slice in time.
They end the day with kids learning some social skills.
Musician friends that come in, and Leanne is a fiddler and her husband plays guitar and bass fiddle, and so they come and do music, and they always do a contra dance, which is like the Virginia reel. So we lined up here in 2 lines facing each other, and Dr. Paul was the caller, and he instructed us, and then his wife played the fiddle. We were doing dos-I-dos and all this stuff, and then the promenade went all the way around the classroom. It was a lot of fun. The kids always enjoy that.
The world has changed drastically since the New Bethel School was full of students every day, and that was less than 100 years ago.
But Karen Almeter thinks it's important for kids today to have that connection with those that came before them. Saving this old school wasn't just something she wanted to do. It's something she thinks needed to be done. How does it make you feel, knowing that you and the group that you worked with saved this place?
Well, we're really proud of it. It turned out beautifully, I think, and we're very proud of it. But just continue with our mission of teaching the skills. You never know when you may have to use them. You may need to know them.
Kelli, our day at New Bethel School in Missouri was especially meaningful for me because I grew up with my dad telling me what it was like for him as a kid, growing up on a farm and attending the Vyers Chapel School in Texas.
And for me, it wasn't just about the memories of what life was like for the kids back then, though that did make quite an impression. I was equally impressed by all the things Karen Allmeter is able to do. She is what you could call a Renaissance woman.
When we bought the place and the property, they had pulled the pump head and pulled out the sucker rods and the pipes, and all of it was just laying on the ground over here. And so I searched and found an elderly man who was a well driller. He was still actively drilling wells, but he remembered how these old pumps and wells worked. And so...
And I guess the well was still there. It just didn't have the rods.
And we estimated by the length of the pipe, we estimated it was 160 feet deep. And the well driller was Floyd Crowdy, who lived right here. Yeah, that was his profession, and he evidently drilled a lot of the wells around here.
So with this having a well, that means inside, no running
plumbing.
water.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful building, isn't it?
Thank you. From the exterior, yeah, it is beautiful. Yeah, and the stone was well preserved.
Yeah.
I mean, it's lasted over 100 years, and may last another 100 years. Who knows?
You want to go inside and show us what you've done in there?
Yeah, sure.
The stonework, the New Bethel School. It says on the sign 1915 to 1948, so sometime after World War II, it looks like it was no longer used as a school.
It's a good thing the roof stayed intact.
This was called the Little Room. This was grades 1 through 4. Everywhere there was space, wall space, there had been a chalkboard, and they were just all warped and loose, and so we tore them all down. But behind it, they had painted black over the wall as a chalkboard, and there was a lesson on it. And it's still there, but I covered it. I built the chalkboard.
You built it?
I built a lot of things. I built this desk too because we needed a desktop for the double seat there. That's just a 1/4-inch plywood, sanded real thoroughly and painted with chalkboard paint. But this chalk tray is the original. It was longer, but I cut it down and we shortened it a little bit because it went from wall to wall.
So you restore buildings, you built furniture and chalkboards. What did you do for a living during your life?
I was a teacher.
Of course you were. What grades did you teach in subjects?
I taught ESL English to immigrant children, and I taught Spanish, high school Spanish, and some college Spanish. Then the last 14 years before I retired, I taught GED classes and ESL to adults.
Take yourself back to the 1915s or 1920s, and tell me what you think this was like on a typical school day. What would have been the atmosphere in here, and who would have been in here?
I'm sure it would have been much stricter than what we are now. Teachers just couldn't put up with nonsense from the kids. They rapped on the hand with a ruler or whatever if they messed up. But the way of teaching was different. Of course, now we have grades that are separate, but the teacher had to teach at least 4 grades
at once.
Yeah, and so she might get the older kids started on something on their own and then work with the younger kids and then progress. Yeah, it would have been challenging, and she couldn't have put up with any nonsense, or there just wouldn't have been a learning environment there for the kids. So, but I think from the people that I've talked to, and I've interviewed several alumni from the school, and they all felt like they got a good education here, and they told tales, some pretty funny tales.
Can you share some of those with us?
One of them in particular, this man, he and his sister both attended here, and they were in their 90s when I interviewed them, and he was just a comic. But he said he got in trouble with the teacher, and the teacher was going to spank him, so he went out to the outhouse and he stuck his stocking hat in his overalls, and so he came back and bent over and she paddled him, and he just snickered because he didn't feel a thing. So he must have been quite a character. And another lady, Ethel Marinelli, she was my biggest source of information here. She said that she had her first kiss here in first grade.
In first grade?
by a little first grade boy.
Aww.
So there were some interesting stories.
Lots of memories.
Yeah.
Comes time for lunch.
Yeah.
What would have happened then?
Okay, well, probably would have rang the bell, or at least dismissed them anyway. And if the weather was suitable, they'd play outdoors. And some of the things that they played marbles. And Ethel Marinelli told me the ground was just worn bare from playing marbles out here. And they played ball out back, baseball. Anyway, they would have played outdoors. There wasn't any equipment, no playground equipment. They made up their own play.
Had to amuse themselves with what they had,
Right,
which was
yeah,
their imaginations.
yeah.
And
So we've done some of that. We've got ropes for jump rope. We've got tin can stilts. We've just got a rubber ball they can kick around. And we've got bases for baseball to play out back. So when we have enough kids for teams.
there's got to be a lot of satisfaction to looking at this and knowing what it looked like
Yeah.
before you
Yeah.
guys started the restoration
Yeah.
and looking at it now.
We've tried to keep it as much original as we could, like this bead board. I found a perfect match. You really can't tell where the new and the old are. And I tried to match the paint. The original paint was kind of a brown of all the bead board. I brought in a lot of people from the larger area and even from out of town. We had a boy come all the way from Reeds, Missouri, which is quite a ways, at least an hour drive. His mother found out about a historic school day, and she called me up and said, "Hey, can I still bring my son? He really wants to be part of this." So it was neat. A couple of boys from Carl Junction came down.
So this room over here would have been grades 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Exactly. And we probably won't ever convert it into a classroom, I would imagine, because we use it for workshops, classes, and just for preparing food. We have a little general store here, so during our Heritage Festival in the spring, this is open.
Hand crocheted items, bread
Yeah.
bag,
Bread bags.
pin cushions, button spinners, sugar scrub, marbles, game,
There it
with
is.
bag and instructions.
Yeah.
You have to have the instructions.
I've made a number of sunbonnets and so-
You've made these.
And
Of course you did.
She sews.
I sew on a travel sewing machine. That's my machine, and I have 2 more at the house.
So you still sew on one of these
Yeah.
old Singer
Oh,
treadles?
Yeah, I love them. Yeah. And then we made a bunch of rag dolls. The kids helped make the rag dolls. Those are fun to make.
And then the quilts.
But mainly we have
The rugs.
the rag rugs. I made that one. That is a mill, and we just bought that maybe a year ago. And we've milled corn in here. The kids love to do that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, hand crank it.
And if you want some really different cornbread, this is the way it used to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here, where they'd
And we
crank it.
made, last year we made cornbread out here. We do Dutch oven cooking outside over a fire. And so the kids ground the corn, and then we made cornbread.
And did they get to taste the
Yeah,
cornbread then?
yeah.
See it from start to
Yeah,
finish?
But just to be able to know how to do it
Yeah.
and teach others how to do it and the importance of why you
Yes,
need to know this.
we did a little, let's see, what was it? We did a little House on the Prairie day for the homeschool children. It was just one of our monthly get-togethers. And in here, the girls did corn husk dolls. That was fun. And milled corn. And then the boys were outside with my husband and one of the dads, and they were building, I'll show you, a toolbox with hand tools. So it was like this. I made this one. But so the boys together built one with hand saws and hand drill, the brace and bit drill. And so it was pretty amazing. This is my pride and joy right here. It's an old ice box.
Yes.
And it has a patent date on it right here of 1881, December 1881. So I don't know if it's actually that old, but that's when it was patented. It was the guy that looked it up at an old catalog, and it sold for $15, I think. And that was the deluxe model. This is the deluxe model because it has a tap here for melting ice. You have cold water.
Cold water.
So you would, the way you would have cooled things is you had blocks of ice.
Right.
that you-
Exactly. This is where the ice would go.
You see the hole here? So that goes
Yeah, I
down
had-
here to the
Down
spigot.
here.
I had a machinist
As
do
it
that.
melts, so you've actually got cold water coming out of there, plus you're draining off the water from the melting ice.
This is stainless steel, so it's clean.
Where did your love for history come from?
Probably Little House on the Prairie.
Really?
I grew up in the country too. We didn't have, it wasn't a farm, it was just a rural setting. But it was actually an old coal mining town out west of Denver. Former coal mining town. So my husband and I wanted some farmland, or we wanted to live in the country. And we've had animals. We had to learn we were kind of green at it because we never had farm animals, even growing up in the country. And gardening was fairly new, so. But yeah, we put in a big garden, and we've got fruit trees and berries, and we've had goats. I milked goats, and we drank goat's milk, used goat's milk, and I made goat's milk soap.
So this lifestyle that would have been around for people who attended this school, you were kind of naturally attracted to that.
Yes, we were already more or less homesteading. We heat with wood. I do a lot of baking, bake all of our bread, and I spin also, a spinning wheel.
When you do that sort of thing and you get a little sample of it, and it's just a tiny sample of it, do you think you would have liked to have lived then or not?
Yeah, I've said that for a long time, that I was born in the wrong century.
And we want to take the time to say thank you to our sponsor, Mueller Metal Roofs and Buildings. They allow us to travel all over America and bring these great stories to you. You can listen to On the Road with Kelli and Bob wherever you get your podcast, or you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, or you can download that free Odyssey app. Listen anytime, anywhere.